Hello, everyone. We're very happy that you're here to join us for this Organist Launchpad live stream. I'm here as Chair of Advocacy for the Royal Canadian College of Organists, and we have a wonderful panel to be able to discuss all things organ. First of all, we'd like to thank Heritage Canada and the Government of Canada for the funding for this event. Organist Launchpad is a 26 video series which covers all topics related to the organ, everything from improvisation to competitions, from virtual organ to music law. The reality is that there's something there for everyone, for us all to be able to learn from each other and to be able to further grow this important and transcendent musical instrument which we all play. Very happy to be able to have with me a number of distinguished panelists. Boran Zaza, Cadence Brassard, David Simon, Isabelle Demers, Jean-Willy Kunz, Jeff Young, Maggie Burk, Maria Gajraj, and finally, Trevor Grahl. We're so happy that you are here to join us. We would love to hear from you and to hear what you're all about. Boran, maybe you can get us started and tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Jean-Paul, and hello, everyone. My name is Boran Zaza. My pronouns are she, her, and I am joining you today from Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. I am a not-so newcomer to Canada. I've been here for 6 years. I'm Kurdish from Iraq and Syria. During the day, I am the Director of Communications and Development at Orchestras Canada. And at night and on the weekends, I offer consultation to classical musicians on their imaging, branding, social media presence, how to create video content. I'm a videographer for classical musicians and a pianist.
Cadence, how about you?
Hi, I'm Cadence Brassard. I'm 14 years old from Ontario, Canada. And I started playing organ in my late single digits, so when I was 9. And I've been playing for 5 years. And I played virtually in concerts and live, where I express both my interests in traditional organ music and in contemporary arrangements that I arrange myself.
David, how about yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name's David Simon. I teach piano, organ, and music theory at St. Michael's Choir School in Toronto. I'm really excited about the organ because it blends a lot of the stuff that I love to do. It has the wonderful sustain of choral music. It can do anything from the ancient to the modern, and you can improvise, you can collaborate with people. So this panel is really exciting because it brings together lots of different people together to talk about all the multifaceted elements of the organ and its wonderful music and performers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. Isabelle, how about you?
Hi, I'm Isabelle, currently speaking from Montreal. I grew up here in Quebec, spent about 20 years in the States, and I'm just newly back from last year. On a weekly basis, I teach organ at McGill University in Montreal. And then on weekends, usually I'll be somewhere else performing either church or concerts and meeting all sorts of really fun people. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all.
Thank you so much. Jean-Willy.
Hello, I'm Jean-Willy. I'm originally from France. I've been living in Montreal for almost 20 years now. I'm involved in several organizations here around town. I teach, I'm professor of organ at the Conservatoire de Musique in Montreal. I'm also the artistic director for the CIOC, the Canadian International Organ Competition, which is a 3-annual competition here in Montreal, but also an annual festival every year in October. And I am also the organist in residence for the Montreal Symphony Orchestra on the Casavant Opus 3900, which you can see behind me. I'm not at the hall currently, but you have a little glimpse of the organ. So I'm in charge of programming the organ concerts as an employee of the Montreal Symphony Orchestra. So all the concerts which I help organizing are part of the OSM's concert series. So it's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Jeff, how about you?
Hi from the west coast of Canada, from Vancouver. I am a music producer and a film composer, former treasurer of the Composers Guild, and I've also been an entertainment lawyer for 35 years and teach law at Capilano University. My favorite organ sound, because I'm an old guy that loves traditional rock and roll, is of course the B3 organ that was featured on so many of these great recordings in the 60s and 70s.
Thank you, Jeff. Kevin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Komisaruk. I am a professor of organ at the Faculty of Music at the University of Toronto. I teach courses in organ performance and pedagogy, improvisation, as well as broader interest courses in creative identities in music and music for palliative care. In recent years, a big passion of mine has been to expand the organist community of practice so that it's more diverse and inclusive and accessible. And my students and I work to accomplish this through anything from academic research to community engagement and outreach, including with organizations like the RCCO, building on-ramps to these communities, incorporating technology, online learning, and finding contexts to incorporate organ outside of the traditional ones of sacred music and stage performance. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Kevin. Maggie, how about yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Maggie Burk. I am the Director of Choral Activities at Carthage College, coming to you today from Kenosha, Wisconsin, just south of Milwaukee. Obviously, I'm a choral director, mostly by trade, also a composer. I write a lot of sacred music for the Episcopal Church in the U.S., as well as for other denominations. And I am from a family of organists, and it's great to be here to talk about this amazing instrument today.
Fantastic. Maria, how about yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Gajraj. I am also in Montreal, and I'm currently doing my doctorate in organ performance at McGill University. My main research focuses on Caribbean organ repertoire and its performance practices. I'm also the co-founder of Symphonics Collective, a Montreal-based arts collective that strives to introduce the organ to wider and more diverse audiences in new contexts, and to highlight the work of women, minority, and queer artists through our multidisciplinary concerts. I'm really excited about this Organist Launchpad because this will help make the organ more accessible.
Thank you, Maria. And Trevor.
Hello, hello everybody. I'm joining you from Amsterdam in beautiful Tulip, Netherlands. There's tulips all over the place now. Very excited to be here. I grew up in a very small town in Canada. I'm from Pembroke, Ontario. But I work in The Hague now as a teacher in the conservatory where I teach composition and instrumentation. And I'm also very lucky to be the artistic assistant in a concert hall in Amsterdam called Orgelpark. If you translate, it just means organ park. And it's also a weird word in Dutch, by the way. And I'm very happy to be able to assist. It's a concert hall with a lot of new organ music, as well as traditional, but a lot of new organ music, putting the organ in a new context. You can see behind me, there's a screenshot of the inside of our new instrument. And my work there is to assist composers, not necessarily composers that have worked with the organ before, but composers that perhaps have no experience working with the instrument, in creating new pieces. And as well, during the year, I host a number of student projects where I encourage students to take advantage of all of the resources that the space can offer, with attention for inclusivity and diversity also in audiences.
Fantastic. That's really wonderful. Thank you, everyone. It's really exciting to be able to be here with you to chat about this instrument. We'd like to start with kind of a general question. Maria, Isabelle, David, how did you get involved in the organ, and what excites you about it? The reality is that there are likely some common threads among us about how we first heard the instrument, but I'd be curious to hear it from you directly. Maybe we'll start with Maria. So what really drew you to the instrument? What excites you about it?
So I actually didn't start playing the organ until I was about 18 or 19. And I had grown up Catholic, so I went to church and I heard the organ. But honestly, I have to say I didn't pay much attention to it until I started playing it. And the minute I got on that console and saw the vast assortment of stops and sounds and colors that you create with just one instrument, and also the sheer power of it at your fingertips, I was hooked, and I switched my major. I was studying cognitive science, and I just switched to organ and never looked back, really.
That's amazing. I mean, the whole thing about sounds, I mean, it reminds me a bit of, what David said about how, like, what he does really brings together all these different things about the instrument. David, maybe you can speak a bit about that, about how you came to hear the instrument, but maybe also about, like, what do those sounds mean to you? How do you experience the organ?
Yeah, I first started learning the instrument when I was a chorister, so I come at it from a choral music background. And what I really appreciated about the organ initially was how powerful of an instrument it was, but also how intimate it could be, and the idea of being an instrument that didn't have to breathe. You could just have these washes of sound go on seemingly infinitely, which I thought was pretty cool and inspiring as a singer. And these things still excite me today. But in addition to those, I love the spontaneity of the instrument. There's a wonderful just array of colors that you can show. You can change timbres. You can mix things like a kaleidoscope at any time. And so you can just infuse so much color and vibrancy into any repertoire that you'd like.
Wow. And Isabelle, I imagine some of these threads are likely common to you. I'm sure you've done like orchestral transcriptions, things like that. So how did you get started with the instrument?
A little bit like Maria, actually. I also did not really start seriously until I was in my late teens. Was not terribly interested at first, to be honest. I saw playing organ as a way to pay for my piano studies. So I actually finished my undergrad, quit organ for about 6 months, and then realized that I really missed the physicality of it, playing with all your limbs. I also think that at that time, my taste in repertoire changed from the early romantics a bit more to the late romantics. And then, of course, there's so much organ repertoire that was written back then. So yeah, then, the fact that I just absolutely love to play with sounds, then I think it was a very natural match for me to be an organist more than a pianist.
It's so interesting. I find that, I don't think I've ever met an organist who wasn't first a pianist. Like, the reality is that most people who become organists or start to play the organ, maybe is a better way to put it, began first by taking years of piano lessons. I mean, I imagine that most people here on this panel have that common thread. But, as we've talked about how the instrument has, all these different colors, there's repertoire from every era. One thing that I think is important for us to kind of think of and talk about, maybe this is Trevor, Kevin, as well as, Jean-Willy. It'd be great to hear from the three of you about this instrument. Is commonly known for its, let's say, traditional repertoire. Now, I know what is traditional depends on who you talk to, but if it's known for kind of its concert music, what is beyond that? Maybe we can start with Jean-Willy. What is beyond the organ's kind of traditional repertoire of things like Bach or French Romantic music? Like, what extends further beyond that music?
Well, what I like to experiment with, and Montreal is a perfect city for that, and the Maison Symphonique, the symphony house, where I play, and so I play with the symphony orchestra also. It's a perfect setup for interdisciplinary projects. So to go really beyond what has already been done and try and experiment with crossover projects. For example, organ and dance, organ and cinema, organ and other kinds of music styles. Montreal is a hub for jazz. For example, we have an international jazz festival. Montreal has great pop singers. Montreal has a great electronic music scene also. So all these kinds of projects which intertwine different music styles, I think are really appealing for the audience. Something I try always to remind myself, and specifically because I work for a symphony hall. We have, we have budget targets. We need ideally for each concert to fill the hall, because a symphony house is really expensive to rent. So we have to fill it. So I always question myself, what is the specificity of Montreal, of our city, of our audience here? What do people in town like? What can we offer them that they already like? But what could we mix with the organ? And then we can come up with organ and a dance company, for example. So a whole concert, but where the pieces will be choreographed by contemporary dancers. We can come up, and I will probably let my colleagues talk about that, organ and cinema. So how can we project silent movies, for example, and improvise on that? How can we create projects with a DJ, organ and DJ, or organ and a jazz musician? What kind of repertoire can we imagine? And what can we do to get the word out there that the organ is really a very multifaceted instrument, and that it's an instrument of the future?
It's interesting. I thought it was really interesting how you spoke about part of what you do is to try to figure out, like, well, what would Montreal, what would really cater to Montreal, right? Your experience of the music scene, or maybe the art scene, or even the community of Montreal, and perhaps maybe one of the things that I know we've all experienced in one way, shape, or form is the fact that organs are obviously very common in religious settings, because they work well in those settings for what those settings attempt to accomplish, communal singings, things like that. But that's one facet of the instrument. There are so many other facets and so many other ways that we can cater to kind of local needs and local interests. I know, Kevin, some of the work that you've done has been around virtual instruments and digital instruments, and many ways, I imagine, maybe you could speak about this, is they're limitless in terms of where you can place them. The reality is you don't have to worry about touring and bringing around with you an instrument that weighs multiple tons, because you can just carry it in a console, or you can just carry it in a sample set. So maybe you could speak a bit about how virtual organs and digital organs, the value of that to cater to local groups.
Yes, to build on what Jean-Willy is saying, a virtual instrument is really ultimately just a tool like any other, and it has its strengths and its weaknesses. To answer this broader question about where the instrument is going, I would take this similar kind of rhetorical posture that aggravates all of my students, where I could sort of say, well, the answer's in them. No answer that I could come up with for that is going to be as good as all of the answers that everyone can come up with themselves. So I look then at a broader level of questioning, and that's really to look at what are the raw elements of the organ. What does it do so beautifully? It's the same things that I think drew a lot of us to the instrument, and certainly drew me to the instrument. That's this kind of very strong element of experimentation with color and texture, this limitless range of spectrum that we can explore, the physicality of the instrument, the athleticism of the instrument, the proprioceptive sort of intersection there, so that you get more of a developed sense of yourself, your physicality. It's a very physical instrument, so you're becoming more conscious of the use of your body and how that use of the physical body interrelates to what kind of feedback you're getting from the instrument, as well as this wonderful connection to acoustic space that I think really is seductive. It's seductive to the listener. It's, I think, a lot of what has brought us in as organists to feel ourselves interacting with space that is so much larger than us and so much larger than the instrument, and seeing how the music itself was composed in a way to interact with that space. So all of those elements, I think, are really what feed the kind of creative ideas that emerge in people about how to use the instrument then. How can we use the instrument to draw on all of those elements? How can we use it to explore color, interact with space, challenge our physicality, lead us into that extemporaneous, creative, expressive space? So, you know, to draw on what Jean-Willy is also saying, that we see that when you're trying to figure out what an audience wants, there is so much mission critical work to be done to know your market, but also to realize these universal human interests that we have to feel implied in creative expression. So it's for an audience to feel implicated in the music, to feel involved in the music, to feel invited into the music. And there are many ways to achieve that. There's no one way to do that. But really my approach is really to encourage people to look at these very broad categories of the organ and how it speaks, and to develop ideas from that point.
Thank you, Kevin. Trevor, I know that you likely have a lot to say on those points. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've done quite a lot with you've done a lot to mechanically manipulate instruments, is maybe a way to put it. I mean, you really push it to its extreme in a wonderful way. I think it's something that most of us never get a chance to do.
Well, it's true. We are in a bit of a privileged position in the Orgelpark, having so much sort of capital to explore these things. And at its heart, it is also a very good research center. Maybe you could see it a little bit like an organ lab, in a way.
Could you explain for our viewers, those who may not be familiar with what is Orgelpark?
Orgelpark is a concert hall in Amsterdam that's dedicated to, I guess you could say, maybe revisiting or reimagining the place of the place of organ repertoire and the organ itself in a musical society, not necessarily in a religious context, although that's very fine. It also tries to put the organ in direct contact with composers, and what we really want to do is create excitement for this instrument in the country. And we've been around for, I think, 15 years right now, and I do have to say there has been a result. I think it's known in Holland as a thing. And also because there are so many educational programs involved, especially for composers, and that's kind of my job, is to, as I said earlier, to sort of assist them, to build on what Kevin and Jean-Willy said. I'm having a very funny job because I have to bring a composer in, and they look at it and they say, "Oh, it's an organ. I know that. It's the Bach thing," and I'm kind of bored. And then once you start getting into it and start sort of showing them, no, listen to the sound of this, listen to these two things together, they slowly become bewitched by the possibilities of this continuous sustained sound. And we have certain instruments that where it's possible to change the air pressure, to change the way that the pipes speak, to mix certain pipes with other pipes in a very sort of unusual way. They start seeing it as almost like an analog synth. And suddenly it's not this thing that they knew anymore. It's something just absolutely different. And what I really love is that generally, if you have a space like we do and you set a composer down that really wants to do something with it, all of them make their own individual thing. And I think I've helped, I don't know, maybe I'm an organ doula or something. I'm not really quite sure what I am, but I guess I could help. I've helped birth many, many, many pieces now, maybe at least 50, I think. And they really do all sound differently. And I think this gives me hope, because I think the organ is still a rich enough instrument that a younger generation of makers or composers can come along and use it in their own way. And when I'm teaching in the conservatory, when I teach the orchestration lessons, I say, well, look, a violin, you know, how does Vivaldi use the violin? How does Lachenmann use the violin? How does Rebecca Saunders use it? They all have a different way that they use it. And I think it's the same way for the organ. And one thing that happened last year is that we had two artists in to play concerts. One was Callie Malone. Maybe some of you know the work of Callie, and the other one was Claire Singer. And both of these very fine artists, they have their own take on the organ completely. I mean, Callie was playing on our 1479 mean tone Renaissance organ, and she drew a completely different crowd, completely new. We hadn't seen these faces before. Claire also performed and also drew a very interesting crowd. So this gives me hope that if you, in good faith, set somebody down with the instrument and they really want to work with it, they'll find something that probably is unique to them. And if it's honest, I think public will just come. The organ has also very interesting drone properties as well.
It's interesting because I think one of the things that that's important for us to talk about is how do you make the instrument accessible? And you know, we'd love to hear from Boran, Cadence, Dave, Jeff, as well as Maggie to really talk about, like, the reality is some of the stuff that Trevor, Jean-Willy, and Kevin were talking about is totally new to the vast majority of people who have kind of conceptions of what the organ is. Boran, I know you do a lot to try to communicate and market this art form through your own work with Orchestras Canada. Tell us a bit about kind of your own thoughts on the accessibility of the instrument and maybe ways in which we could all work together to increase that accessibility.
Absolutely. So growing up in Muslim parts of Iraq and Syria, I've lived in a world where organ didn't exist at all. And I do remember the first time I got in touch with the instrument when I was 19 years old, and I saw it for the first time, and it blew my mind. I felt like there were endless possibilities in music that I wasn't even aware of, even as a classical musician myself. It has been something really important for me in my artistic career to empower classical musicians to share their craft, to share their process, to share what they're up to, and to empower them to know that it's not only about sharing the final product with people, but it's also about sharing everything around that, your process of practicing, how you view music, your excitement about it. All of this is really, really important to the art form. And nowadays we have a lot of affordable technology that helps us to do that. We have access to our iPhones, we have access to microphones, a lot of exciting things that we did not have affordable access to in the past. So I think that by educating musicians more about these things, it helps them building their careers beyond their studies and beyond just trying to get that one contract, and being always active in the music scene and building connections and building their communications with people around them, building their fan base, building their community. So all of these things I truly believe are truly important, and I'm really happy that the Organist Launchpad focuses on all of these other skills as well that are extremely important for musicians nowadays. I hope this answers the question.
Absolutely. Cadence, I know that some of what you do really well is content creation and trying to bring the instrument out of just the classical sphere, to not not that it's exclusivist, right? Because I know you do a lot of Bach and you do at the same time totally different kind of music. So from your own standpoint, can you maybe tell us a bit about your own kind of creative process? Like if you post a video, like do you kind of follow what Boran was talking about to say like, well, it's not just the final product, it's also people would love to know about like the practicing and how you go through those stages. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff that I do with the organ, I though I do enjoy the Bach and the general like more traditional organ, I do arrange things, and whenever someone comes over and they're like, oh, like they look at the organ and they're like, what's that? Like I have a Rogers 333 Olympic in my house, and they look over at the organ and they're like, what's that? I'm like, that's the organ. They're like, can you play it? I'm like, yes. So then I usually play some Bach or something, and then I shock them a little bit by playing like something more modern, and they're like, wait, was that like Lady Gaga? And I was like, yeah, that like the organ can do that as well as like just the traditional stuff. They're like, so where do you start? So I usually bring say like a piano score, and I listen to the song that I'm inspired to arrange on repeat to find where the different voices interact, because a lot of modern songs, they have the ability now to do multiple tracks over top of each other. So like different voice parts, different beats layered, just so many layers in these new songs. And which I think wasn't very common in the prior times, like even with rock bands or like with Elvis Presley, even back then, because you couldn't just keep layering on tracks. But now with the organ and with this modern technology, then the modern technology can layer tracks that the singers can, that the performing artists create. And with the organ, you have like pretty much the ability to create minimum of 3 different voices just by yourself with your hands and your feet. And you can add up to like 5 or 6 if you really want. So you can add in like the organ's own special voicing and your own take on a song that a lot of people might not hear on the organ, and it makes them intrigued with the organ and can draw them into the organ as well.
Right. It brings up something that I think is important for us to touch on. Maybe Jeff, you could speak to this. David, I know you can also speak to this after Jeff. And it's really kind of partially about the behind the scenes aspect of copyright, and the question of, well, so in the organ community, like in any music community, really, repertoire that is public domain is very easily accessible. And the reality is that like the relevance and the contemporary nature of art, it's essential. I mean, we need to be able to play and hear repertoire by living composers. So I was curious if maybe you could speak to your experience of copyright and how that comes into play with the organ. I mean, do you find that there are ways in which organists could better access music by contemporary composers?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that many clients who do work in the charitable religious space, and I've certainly done my share of dealing with that at many levels. Actually, in my late teens and early college years, I used to actually be involved in concert promotion in the contemporary Christian world, where they would bring in, recording acts that were very well known from all around the world, mostly America. But besides handling everything else, we would have to put on these concerts and actually be a concert promoter. And so that was the beginning of me negotiating a live performance deals, and that carried on into my law practice and so on. And I ended up doing things that were pretty interesting. Like one of my biggest things was the 2010 Winter Olympics here in Vancouver, where we booked acts from around the world. And so the first thing you have to learn if you are involved in, dealing with artists and performing artists is if the performing artist controls their own repertoire, you literally don't have to worry about copyright other than get permission from that recording artist. And so if the artists themselves are performing in your church, let's say, a simple understanding that if they control their own repertoire, that what they play all night is something that they're happy to do, which of course in every case that's what you get, you're fine. And so that's number one. The second thing is if the performing artist is basically creating their own versions of songs that are protected, there are not that expensive public performance licenses that you can get, and the organizations that issue those licenses are very accessible, SOCAN being one of them. And remember that if you're not recording, then you actually are only looking at one license, which is a public performance license.
Right.
And then in addition, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, in addition, depending on the situation, and it's a bit limited, but our copyright actually says that, and I'll know it's actually right in the act that says, if you are doing something in furtherance of a religious, educational, or charitable object, and that mostly means during an actual service, the performance of that in your venue is actually exempt from copyright. So balancing all those things and understanding them can give you a lot of room to get a lot of great modern music out there.
Well, and I know, David, you have been able to premiere some really great organ compositions by emerging and well-known composers. The process of working with a composer to basically like bring their work to life. Can you maybe tell us a bit about that? And then I'd love, Maggie, to get your sense of kind of how the organ then ties into choral music as well.
Yeah, so when we're premiering new works, it's vitally important that we do this. It's a wonderful expression of our community, and just presenting new composers is a way just to keep one's music programming fresh. So if we're performing a new work, I think just working with living composers, as Jeff said, especially ones who are in control of their own copyrights, I think is a really great way just to bring composers that might not yet be recognized in a very large sense to the fore, and to treat your audience to some new voices, which is also great. When it comes to working with living composers and premiering new works, it's kind of interesting because sometimes composers they're not organists themselves, but they have ideas of what kind of sounds they might want to achieve. So you can be in dialogue with them, you can play back and forth and say, was this what you had in mind? Or you might even suggest things. So there's a wonderful collaborative creative aspect to performing new works.
Fantastic. And I know, Maggie, you've worked quite a lot with choirs, and organ has, we talked a bit about how the organ is interdisciplinary, and Jean-Willy was speaking about that with regards to the OSM. Can you maybe tell us about how your own work in the choral world has been informed by, or maybe kind of enriched by, the organ?
Absolutely. I would say, I think someone earlier mentioned I think maybe it was David, that wall of sound feeling. And when I was a kid, listening to the music of Herbert Howells, I mean, he comes to mind immediately, but, having that overwhelming awe experience, I think it's both an aural sensation and a physical reaction. In terms of, advocating for the instrument, we got to go right to those feelings in that sense. And the organ and choral world, I think that crossover can be a really great way to help people learn that this feeling is that this thing exists, and that they can be a part of it and see themselves as part of it, I think. For instance, I try to program music at my collegiate level, but I've also worked again in high school contexts and middle school contexts, and then in church contexts. Try to get people who don't meet the organ in church or don't meet it in a concert hall, because that's not culturally part of their upbringing, get them to have that first encounter experience. And oftentimes it is through a choral piece. And so bringing that to as many people as possible, I think, is a really important part of my job.
So this kind of factors into, and this to me is kind of an everyone discussion. So it'd be great to kind of get everyone's thoughts kind of as they come up. But maybe starting with you, Maggie, what is the future of the organ? I mean, you've said it really well that for you, the future of the organ is partially through choral music. The reality is that people experience the organ in your world, drawing on what Kevin said, drawing on what Jean-Willy said about like the local reality. What your community experiences the organ through is choral music. For you, what is the future of the instrument?
I think the future of the instrument involves its versatility and it involves its color palette. And I think about people who are, taking the organ into new contexts, using the available technology tools. Someone like Anna Lapwood, who is the director of choirs at Pembroke College, Cambridge. And she's also the organist for the Royal Albert Hall. And she has a TikTok platform where she's now performing movie transcriptions, like How to Train Your Dragon is a famous one that she's gotten really famous for. But then again, we're taking something that's a traditional setting, a traditional instrument, and we are, making it accessible to modern, teenagers in that sense, who could then finally say, "Oh, that sound is like that. I want to be part of that sound. I want to make that sound," which I think for me is a really, really exciting thing. The other part of it that I think is really fascinating as a, I would say, an organist who knows enough to be dangerous but doesn't really practice anymore. Is how I think the organ, aside from jazz in a sort of conservatory setting, I think the organ is the only other instrument that I know of where improvisation is still a vital part of a complete training in something. And I think there's a lot of really creative people, perhaps, who come to the organ. If you come from not a written Western music background, the fact that improvisation and just being present with your ears in that sense can still be a huge part of your training, a really amazing doorway in. I think we should really be cultivating those skills as well.
Fantastic. I love the element about improvisation. I know so many of us, it is a gateway to artistic expression above and beyond written repertoire. Maria, I'd love to get your sense of what is the future of the organ?
For me, I see a future in which the organ isn't boxed into liturgical music necessarily or any other kind of music, but is more used in conjunction with other art forms to create immersive experiences. I think because of the nature of the organ and how, like people have said, it can create this wall of sound, I think it can be used with other art forms to create this multidisciplinary dynamic experience that really transports you.
Very cool. Trevor, how about you?
Well, I was just typing up a question because I thought we could have something. Shall I just read my question or say my question?
Sure, yeah.
Instead, I'm thinking, I think we're being very utopian today, and I love it. And of course, this organ behind me is called the Utopa organ, so I'm maybe the worst one, but I'm just wondering how the average Canadian, let's just say church for now, because I think it is a very common thing in Canada to have church organists. How could we give them the space to, or maybe even the inspiration or the courage to try to open up one of these spaces we're talking about with their congregation? So I think, I'm sorry, I was typing the question. Maggie, was it you? Were you talking about the transcriptions? Yeah, how could we, that could be a great event. And I saw also in the comments, Montreal and yoga, great. Or even, hanging a microphone in the organ or something with a guitar pedal. What kind of advice could we say to just an average, someone in perhaps a place where I grew up in Pembroke, where it's a very tight congregation, but then this moment you start doing something, the congregation looks at you and says, I don't know. How could we give advice to those organists or inspiration to just go for it and maybe play a film or accompany this or put a microphone or what?
I love it's interesting because I love the underlying, like, the future of the instrument is seeing the instrument for what it is, which is art, right? I mean, regardless of the setting, whether it's a religious setting or whether it's a secular setting, whether it's a concert hall or whether it's, if you think about the fact, I find it amazing that the piano used to be an instrument that people didn't sit around in the thousands to listen to at a concert hall. No, they'd sit in a small room, like 15 people, and just listen to someone play. Like that is astounding to think of. That doesn't exist from the standpoint of the organ, like a small hall where people can simply experience the instrument. I think that it's a really important point for us to remember as we kind of think about the future of the instrument is, does the instrument have a way to speak as an art form and just be? And I think that's absolutely wonderful. Kevin, could you maybe speak to what the future of the organ is for you?
Well, for me, a huge piece of the future of the instrument is around its incredible pedagogic importance in developing artistic sensitivity, physical strength that is so broadly applicable to artists who are not specialized in organ, but who have the real potential to benefit from studying it. I mean, in working with students who are not specialists, I try to create a lot of on-ramps at the Faculty of Music for non-specialists to become engaged in the instrument. And what we really do is situate the instrument as a tool for growing their artistry more broadly. So there's this deepened awareness of imitation and counterpoint that develops from studying organ. There's sensitivity to melodic lines and shapes and gestures that comes from studying organ. There's a sensitivity to rhythmic architecture and structures and harmonic structures. They develop a holistic view of orchestration because they're able to experiment with so much sound. So all of those things have direct bearing on how they develop as musicians and what they're going to do, no matter what their specialty is. So I really think that there's a key piece. You talk about piano and how central piano has been in training musicians historically. I think there's a piece for this to bring organ into that pedagogic piece and into the pedagogic pipeline in the training of artists. So there's a huge future in that. I think it will change how music is composed, how instruments are conceived, and again, a very organic unfolding of the future of the organ by itself, that with nothing that we need to necessarily force, but something that will unfold organically because we've set up an environment for that to happen by the way we train artists.
I love that. It's exactly, I think, what we've all kind of been pointing to. We're going to look to now some questions and comments. The first one will be thrown up here in a second. It would be a dream to be able to have time and space to be able to explore an organ alongside my Ableton Live push setup. Is there a sense of how to improve accessibility here or enumerate that accessibility in the spaces they exist as opposed to virtual? Who'd like to take a go at this?
I have a great answer for this. And if
go ahead.
Is that, may I? Okay. Well, we recognize, at least in the work that we do in the Orgelpark, that a lot of younger composers are more busy with Ableton or Maxim SP or these kinds of things. And so we had somebody program an Ableton plugin. It's a Max for Live plugin that can control the organ directly. And it just filled me with joy because I can see people immediately beginning to create with the organ in the Orgelpark space without having had prior knowledge of organs or how they work. They're just able to do it from the plugin, and of course use that with electronics to everything else that Ableton can do. And I know Ableton that probably
is. Sorry, just can you explain just quickly for those who may not be familiar with Ableton, because it's something that I think if you've worked with electronics, it's like absolutely you know what Ableton is. But could you just quickly give us a kind of 2-second what is Ableton, and then that way it better contextualizes it for us.
It's, in the most simple form, it's a sort of a digital audio workstation. You can create electronic music, you can manipulate MIDI, you can send OSC messages, it can connect to other programs. It's quite a handy tool. A lot of people use this already beside organs, but if your organ has a MIDI connection, I think the possibilities of connecting both of those things together are really endless, and you don't have to have a fancy thing like we do. You just have to have a MIDI connection, which I suppose is sometimes rare.
Wow, that is very cool. That's very
But
fascinating.
they exist.
For sure. Okay, next question. How do venues promote access to their instruments? Think of a few people who would want to answer this one, but who wants to go for it? Okay, maybe I will pick someone.
I'll go for it. I think
Go ahead, yeah.
I think most of them do not promote access to their instruments, and that's a major problem in the organ scene. I think people, I think we want to have young people playing, and so many churches will try to charge them rental fees, or will flat out say, no, you can't have access. I think if we want to have a future generation of organists, we need to open doors and let people have a chance to play. I mean, it's these things have been around for hundreds of years anyway. They won't get broken. I think if we're a bit more welcoming, I think that would do wonders for the organ scene.
Thank you,
I
Isabelle.
I just have to say amen to that. I can't agree with Isabelle more. The question of barriers to access is huge, and we have a very much a do not touch culture around the instrument. One of the advantages of the virtual instruments is that it's a way to facilitate that. But Isabelle is absolutely right about that. It's absolutely central.
I just wanted to add that when I started playing, it was very hard for me to get access to a practice instrument. We contacted about 20 churches within an hour and a half radius of my house, and either they said straight up no, or didn't reply, or said, well, yeah, if she wanted to play a service. So that was, again, the gatekeeping of just like people who actually have the churches, or not churches, the organs in their buildings, and they just look at me and say, I'm too young, I can't handle the organ, I'm going to break it. And it's like Isabelle said, the organs have been around for hundreds of years. You can't really break them. And so I ended up getting a digital practice instrument. It was built in the 1960s and is electronic. So that's mainly what I practice on. But I do have access to a church organ through an organ scholarship job that my teacher is the music director at the church. So it's all of the connections developed over months to years that can maybe get you a somewhat stable place for actual access to a pipe organ. So it's very hard to get around the gatekeeping as well for me.
It's interesting, I think. So we're about out of time for Q&A. So we're just about to wrap it up before we go to the sneak peek video. I think what's interesting is one of the real advantages of the advent of like all these MIDI organs, all these virtual organs, has really opened up the accessibility of historical instruments. Now, they're not live in the space, but it's really wonderful to hear of how many people have essentially come to know the instrument in ways that they otherwise would not have been able to. So that's one thing that I always kind of try to remember. We are going to move on to the Launchpad sneak peek. So the videos themselves are going to start to be released in a few months, I believe. But we have a sneak peek here of the first Organist Launchpad video. In a second, we're going to go straight to that.
You made me smile. You know, I smile a lot, but when you make me smile, it's a bigger smile. So really, really great. Now comes the fun.
Can we have the oboe and principal 4, please?
When people come and look for you, what are they going to find and what do you want them to come to?
Going back to my Texan roots, we call it cowboy, the people who have not learned where the notes are, and then they really open up their knees so they can see their feet.
Today we're talking about this thing, or why do I have this thing here? I'll tell you. Or what's the coolest thing about the pipe organ? Or you just start with a big, loud, engaging chord and then cut to yourself talking, something that grabs people's attention and shows them, oh, this is worth sticking around for.
Absolutely amazing. You know, that was really wonderful to see. That's my first time seeing that video. So I am just like floored by how beautiful that was. I am really excited for the release of these 26 videos. That may bring to an end our live stream, but a few quick things before we finish. It's important to let you all know that the series will become available beginning approximately late June this year. There are 26 different videos, different Organist Launchpad videos. That's different topics entirely. Each one is approximately 45 minutes. So we're really excited about that. We hope you'll be willing to be a part of the experience with us and to watch those videos. I want to thank each of the presenters for taking time out of their day to sit down with me and to chat about this instrument, about our gorgeous instrument that enriches our lives and that enriches the lives of countless others. I'd like to thank the Royal Canadian College of Organists for putting all of this together, the Government of Canada and Heritage Canada for funding, for making this possible. And then finally, to note that as this series becomes available in the coming months, that it will be released in different installments, 3 seasons of installments, the first being 9 videos, the second season being 9 videos, and then the third being 8 videos. So we really hope that you'll be a part of it. I'm very grateful that you've all taken the time to be here. We're going to leave it there. Hope you all have a wonderful day from the Royal Canadian College of Organists, Organist Launchpad.